It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the rain started tapping lightly against the windows of Maureen's diner, a small, cozy spot tucked between a pawn shop and an old bookstore on the corner of Maple Street. The usual crowd shuffled in and out, truck drivers looking for hot coffee, locals craving Maureen's famous meatloaf, and the occasional teenager with a sweet tooth for her peach cobbler. Behind the counter, 28-year-old Lila worked the late lunch shift, her soft humming barely audible over the clink of dishes and muffled conversations. She wiped down tables with practiced rhythm, always offering a warm smile, even when her feet ached or tips ran low. Lila was known around town for her kindness and quiet grace. She never complained, never made a fuss. Most people didn't know much about her past, only that she'd moved to the city a couple years ago, picked up work where she could, and kept to herself. But if you stayed long enough at Maureen's, you might catch a glimpse of something in her eyes, a weight, or maybe a memory she carried like a shadow that wouldn't leave. The bell over the door jingled, breaking the soft hum of the diner. In walked a man who didn't fit in with the usual crowd. He wore an expensive navy coat, custom-made shoes that barely touched the wet floor, and a gold watch that flashed whenever he adjusted his cuff. His name was Preston Weller, a wealthy businessman known for his real estate empire and ego that entered a room before he did. He was in town for a deal, though no one knew what kind. Folks whispered that he bought up struggling properties just to tear them down or flip them into something cold and soulless. He scanned the diner with a look of amused curiosity before taking a seat near the old upright piano in the corner, a piece most had forgotten even worked. Its keys were chipped, and its wood faded from years of sunlight and neglect. Still, it sat there like a relic of another time, waiting for someone to remember it. Lila noticed him right away. His presence changed the air. It wasn't just the way he dressed or the sharpness in his eyes, it was the arrogance that seemed to follow him like perfume. She approached with a polite smile, her notepad ready. "What can I get for you today, sir?" she asked, her voice calm and even. Preston didn't look up at first. He was scrolling on his phone. When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, he gave a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Coffee. Black. And maybe a little conversation to go with it." Lila nodded and turned to get his order. As she walked away, he glanced around again, this time letting his eyes rest on the piano. He chuckled under his breath and called out just loud enough for others to hear. "Funny place for a piano," he said. "Does anyone around here even know how to play it? Or is it just decoration?" The comment hung awkwardly in the air. A few regulars looked over, but no one said anything. Lila's steps slowed just slightly. She placed the coffee in front of him and gave a small nod. "Used to belong to Maureen's grandfather," she said. "He played every Sunday." Preston leaned back, folding his hands across his chest. "And what about you?" he asked. "You look like you've got nimble fingers. Ever tickle the keys?" Lila's smile faltered for half a second. "Not in a long time." That answer seemed to amuse him. "What's the matter? Afraid of playing in front of an audience? Or just never learned?" He said it like a challenge, but the edge in his voice had something else, dismissiveness. Maybe even mockery. A few people at the counter turned their heads. Lila looked at the piano, then back at Preston. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to speak, but then she turned away again, returning to her work. But Preston wasn't done. Something about her silence annoyed him. He raised his voice just a bit more, making sure the room heard. "I'll tell you what," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "I'll leave $100 tip, right here, right now, if the lady plays me a song. One song. That's all." The diner went quiet. $100 was more than Lila made on most shifts. People looked at her, curious, some concerned. She stood near the register, her hands still. "Come on," Preston continued. "Should be easy money, right? Unless, of course, you can't actually play." His words stung, not because they were loud or cruel, but because they came wrapped in sugar, mocking disguised as charm. Lila didn't like being put on display. Not like that. Not for his amusement. But then something in her face changed. Her eyes, which had been soft and cautious, sharpened just slightly. She walked slowly to the piano, her apron still tied, her sleeves rolled up from wiping tables. She didn't say a word as she sat down. Preston leaned forward, smug and entertained. To him, this was just a moment of cheap fun. Something to laugh about later. The diner held its breath. Lila placed her fingers on the keys. They hovered there for a moment, like she was feeling for a memory buried deep. Then, without warning, her hands moved. Not tentatively. Not shyly. They moved with confidence, grace, and something even deeper, emotion. The first notes floated through the diner like a whisper, soft and haunting. Then came the melody, rich, textured, powerful. Her fingers danced across the keys like they belonged there, like the piano had been waiting for her all these years. Preston sat back, the smirk slowly sliding off his face. His eyes narrowed, not in amusement anymore, but disbelief. He looked around, hoping someone else was just as stunned. And they were. Every single person in that diner was frozen in place, watching this quiet waitress pour her soul into a song that seemed too big for the tiny space. It wasn't just music. It was truth. It was pain, joy, loss, and defiance wrapped in every note. She wasn't playing for Preston. She was playing for herself. For every time someone underestimated her. For every moment she bit her tongue when people like him laughed or looked down on her. The last note lingered in the air long after her hands stilled. No one moved. No one spoke. And Preston, for the first time in a long time, didn't know what to say. But just as Lila stood up from the bench, ready to walk away, something unexpected happened. Preston's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. Then his face shifted. Pale. Shocked. Confused. He looked back at Lila like he was seeing a ghost. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "What did you say your name was again?" But Lila didn't answer. She just walked back behind the counter, leaving the question, and the storm it stirred, hanging in the air. The diner stayed silent even after Lila disappeared behind the counter. Plates of half-eaten sandwiches and refilled coffee cups were forgotten as people looked around at each other, unsure of what had just happened. The rain outside had picked up, slapping against the glass harder now, almost like it, too, wanted to be part of the moment. Preston sat there frozen, one hand gripping the edge of the table, the other hovering near his phone. The screen still lit up with the name that had caused him to pale, Lila Hart. It meant something to him. That name wasn't just a coincidence, and the music she just played wasn't something a diner waitress picked up on weekends. He'd heard talent like that before, in far grander places, from someone he thought had vanished for good. He stood slowly, as if the weight of a memory was holding him down. His eyes followed Lila as she moved around the counter, calmly refilling the coffee pot like she hadn't just shaken the air out of the room. But the truth was, her hands were trembling. Not enough for anyone to see, but enough for her to feel the echoes of an old life she tried to forget. Maureen, the diner's owner, leaned against the kitchen door with her arms folded, watching. She'd always suspected there was more to Lila than the young woman ever admitted. A few years back, Lila had come in asking for work, carrying only a duffel bag and a folder of papers she never let anyone see. Maureen had hired her on the spot. Something about the girl's quiet eyes and soft-spoken nature made her impossible to turn away. Over time, Maureen had grown protective of her, never pushing too hard, even when she caught Lila staring out the window like she was waiting for something, or someone. Preston finally walked over to the counter and set his untouched coffee down. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but edged with urgency. Are you Lila Hart?" Lila kept her back to him, pretending to scrub the espresso machine. He waited. "Because if you are, I think we need to talk." She turned then, slowly, wiping her hands on her apron before meeting his eyes. "I don't know you," she said calmly, but her voice was clipped, like she'd practiced it before. "You may not know me," Preston replied, "but I knew your mother. Rebecca Hart. She taught at Juilliard, didn't she? Taught some of the greatest pianists in the country. She was brilliant." Lila's shoulders stiffened, just barely, but enough to tell him he'd hit a nerve. "I studied under her briefly," Preston continued, choosing his words carefully. "I never made it as far as the others, but I remember hearing about you. Her daughter. A prodigy. There were videos going around. Concerts, competitions, interviews. Then, one day, it all stopped. You just disappeared." The diner remained quiet, though a few of the regulars pretended not to listen as they stirred their drinks or flipped newspaper pages slower than usual. Lila exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I left." "There's a difference." Preston tilted his head. "Why?" Lila didn't answer right away. She glanced out the window as a delivery truck rolled past, splashing water onto the sidewalk. Her eyes followed the trail it left, like she was following a memory she didn't want to catch. "You wouldn't understand," she finally said. Preston leaned in slightly. "Try me." She looked him in the eye, then spoke softly but with edge. "My mother pushed me into the spotlight before I was even ready to walk. I was playing Mozart before I could read. She said I was born for greatness, but all I felt was pressure. I didn't get to be a kid. Every wrong note meant punishment. Every win wasn't enough. When she got sick, she made me promise to keep performing. But after she passed, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep being the girl everyone wanted me to be." Her words lingered in the air, and for a moment, Preston said nothing. The woman in front of him wasn't just talented, she was a survivor of something that had broken her quietly and slowly. "But that music," he said quietly, "that wasn't just skill. That was something else. You moved the room, Lila." "I wasn't trying to impress you," she replied, folding her arms. "I know," he said. "That's what made it real." Lila turned away again, but Preston wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Something else was clawing at the back of his mind. There was another reason her name had hit him like a hammer, beyond just the memories of her mother. "I'm working with a foundation now," he said. "We fund underrepresented musicians, young talent who never get the spotlight. I think we could help you. You don't belong in a diner." Lila laughed under her breath, not cruelly, but with a kind of disbelief. "You came in here to mock me. You offered money like I was some trick pony. And now you want to rescue me?" Preston opened his mouth but closed it again. She was right. He hadn't walked in with pure intentions. He'd seen her as someone beneath him, just a waitress, just someone to toy with. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was wrong." Lila looked at him, her face unreadable. But something flickered in her eyes, maybe not forgiveness, but recognition. Before either of them could speak again, the bell above the door jingled. A man in a dark suit stepped in, water dripping from his umbrella. He looked out of place, like someone from a federal office or a high-profile event. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Lila almost instantly. She saw him too, and in that instant, something changed in her posture. She stiffened, her face paling. The man walked up slowly, nodding politely to the other customers. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope, placing it on the counter without a word. Lila stared at it like it was a bomb. He leaned in slightly and said, "They found you." Then he turned and walked out, leaving nothing but wet footprints and silence behind. Preston looked at Lila, confused. Who was that? But Lila didn't answer. Her hands gripped the counter edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. Preston reached for the envelope, but she snatched it up before he could. "This isn't your business," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Preston hesitated, his curiosity growing deeper by the second. "Lila, are you in some kind of trouble?" She didn't look at him. Instead, she walked to the back hallway, the envelope clenched in her fist, disappearing through the door that led to the staff room. Preston stood there alone now, his thoughts racing. The girl he'd underestimated had just turned out to be more complicated, more gifted, and maybe more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. And he had a feeling this was only the beginning. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle outside, but inside Maureen's diner, the tension had only grown thicker. Preston remained by the counter, eyes locked on the hallway where Lila had vanished. The envelope, whatever was in it, had shaken her in a way he hadn't seen before. She was already guarded, already living like she had something to hide. But that moment, the man in the dark suit, the way her whole body stiffened, told him this wasn't just about a past she'd left behind. This was something still following her. Maureen finally stepped forward from the kitchen. "You need to leave her alone," she said, not harsh, but firm. Preston turned to her. "She's in trouble. She's been in trouble for a long time. But she's also stronger than you think. And she doesn't need anyone poking around trying to fix what they don't understand." "I wasn't trying to fix anything," he said. "I just wanted to know who she really is." Maureen gave him a look. "You mean now that she's worth your attention?" Preston didn't have an answer for that. Meanwhile, in the small staff room behind the kitchen, Lila sat on a worn bench, the envelope resting on her knees. She hadn't opened it yet. Her fingers hovered over the seal, heart thudding like a drum. She already knew what it was. It wasn't the first time someone had found her. But it had been years since anyone left something so formal, so quiet, so serious. The last time she'd received one of these, it ended in lawyers, courtrooms, and whispers about custody, trust funds, and a family name she no longer claimed. Her hands finally tore it open. Inside was a folded letter with a single line. "The estate hearing has been reopened. Your attendance is mandatory. Your brother has filed an objection. Lila stared at the words. Her brother, Julian. Of course. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly 5 years, not since the funeral. He'd always resented her for being the chosen one, the prodigy. Their mother had poured everything into Lila's career and left Julian with scraps. He'd grown bitter, sharp, and cold. The last time they saw each other, he accused her of abandoning not just their family but her duty. He said she'd walked away from a legacy built for her. Now he was dragging her back. She folded the paper and placed it back in the envelope. She needed air. When she stepped out of the back room, Preston was gone. Only a few customers remained, quietly sipping coffee. Maureen raised an eyebrow when Lila passed her but didn't ask anything. She knew when to give space. Lila walked outside and stood under the awning. The wet air hit her face, grounding her. She watched the puddles ripple with passing cars, her mind racing. She'd come to this city to disappear, to live small and unnoticed. But somehow, the past always knew where to find her. And now Preston Weller, a man with power, curiosity, and too many questions, had seen more of her than she ever meant to reveal. What worried her most wasn't Preston. It was what might happen if her brother found out where she was. Julian had money, lawyers, and a long memory. If he wanted to ruin her life again, he could. And now she'd played that piano. She'd shown a piece of herself that could be traced. What she didn't know was that Preston hadn't gone far. He was parked across the street, watching the diner through his windshield. He wasn't spying, at least not intentionally. He just couldn't shake what he'd seen. The way Lila played, it had moved him. It wasn't just talent, it was a cry for something. And the envelope? The man who delivered it? Preston had spent enough time in boardrooms to recognize legal pressure when he saw it. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Scott, it's Preston. I need a quiet background check. No noise, no emails. Name's Lila Hart. Used to be a concert pianist. Find out where she's been, what she's hiding from. And see if anyone's looking for her. Back at the diner, another subplot had begun to stir. In a booth near the front window, a high school senior named Shay was finishing her shift as a part-time dishwasher. She'd heard everything, Lila playing, Preston's questions, the quiet man in the suit. Shay had always looked up to Lila. The way she carried herself, calm and composed. But now she was seeing her in a whole new light. That night, Shay went home and typed Lila Hart piano into a search engine. Her screen lit up with old performance videos, articles from classical music blogs, even a feature from when Lila was just 13, hailed as the next great American virtuoso. But then, just like that, the trail ended. No scandals. No news. Just silence. Shay leaned back in her chair, eyes wide. Her quiet mentor had once played for crowds in Paris, London, even Carnegie Hall. What had happened? Back at his hotel, Preston received the background report from his contact. He scrolled through it slowly, details about Lila's performances, her sudden exit from the classical world, her mother's death, and the trust fund complications that followed. But one detail stood out, a sealed legal case involving her brother, filed under estate dispute. It had been buried, but it was active again. The court was seeking Lila. Preston exhaled, leaning back. This wasn't about a woman hiding from her past anymore. It was about someone being dragged into a future she never asked for. And she was entirely alone. But maybe, she didn't have to be. The next morning, Preston returned to the diner. Lila saw him through the window and felt her stomach drop. She considered walking out the back, disappearing again. But she didn't. Instead, she waited as he stepped inside, looking more serious this time. "I know about your brother," he said, quiet but direct. "I know they're trying to pull you back." Lila didn't deny it. "So? What do you want, Preston? Another show? A front row seat to my downfall?" "No," he said. "I want to help." She laughed, short and bitter. "Why would you help me?" "Because I think you're being pulled into something you didn't start. And because maybe, you don't deserve to go through it alone." Lila looked at him, her expression unreadable. "That's a nice offer. But you don't know Julian. You don't know what he's capable of." Preston nodded. "Then tell me." Lila looked around the diner, then back at him. "You want the truth?" "Yes." "Then you better sit down." Because the storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived. Preston slid into the booth across from Lila, his expression calm, but underneath, he was bracing himself. He didn't know what she was about to tell him, only that it felt bigger than anything he'd expected. She folded her arms on the table, the envelope still clutched in one hand, slightly crumpled now from how tightly she'd been holding it. "I haven't spoken to Julian since the funeral," she began, her voice low. "After our mother died, there was a lot of money left. A legacy fund. Property. Instruments worth more than most people's homes. She wanted it divided, but he didn't think I deserved anything. Said I was the reason she died bitter and alone. Said I abandoned her. Maybe I did." Preston listened, nodding slightly. "But what he never understood," Lila continued, "was that I wasn't running from her. I was running from who she forced me to become. I was never allowed to be a person, only a performance. She didn't care how I felt, just how I played. And when I left, I didn't just walk away from music. I walked away from everything. I gave up the name. The stage. The inheritance. But now he wants you back," Preston said slowly, "because he needs you to sign something. He needs me to come back so he can challenge the estate. And if I don't show, the court could rule in his favor. He gets everything. All of it." Preston raised an eyebrow. "That's what he wants?" Lila hesitated. "Not just that. He wants to humiliate me. To prove I'm nothing without the spotlight. He thinks if I walk into that courtroom looking like this," she motioned at her apron and worn sneakers, "then he wins. That I'm a washed-up has-been who couldn't handle the pressure." "You're not a has-been," Preston said firmly. "You're the most talented pianist I've ever seen." She gave a bitter smile. "That's the problem. People only value me for that." Outside, thunder rumbled low and distant. The clouds that had parted earlier in the morning were gathering again, thicker now, darker. The whole day seemed to reflect the weight of what was coming. In the corner of the diner, Shay had her phone out again. She'd recorded the tail end of Lila's impromptu piano performance the day before, not to post online, but to study. She'd played it back over and over that night, trying to mimic Lila's phrasing on her own keyboard at home. But now, as she overheard more of the conversation, something inside her shifted. She realized she wasn't just watching a local mystery anymore. She was watching a woman fighting for her identity, for her freedom, for her voice. Meanwhile, Julian Hart was already making moves. Across the city, in a tall glass office lined with legal books and intimidating silence, he was reviewing Lila's file with his lawyer. "She's been located," the attorney said. "Small town. Works in a diner. Goes by just Lila. No public record of performances since she left the circuit." Julian chuckled. "She's probably hoping no one recognizes her. But it won't matter. She'll show. She always folds when it gets personal." The lawyer cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. A man, Preston Weller, was seen speaking to her." That got Julian's attention. "Weller," he repeated. "The real estate guy?" "Yes. Apparently, he has some kind of arts foundation now. And he's taken an interest in Lila." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Then we need to act fast. If she plays again, if the world sees what she still has." He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung in the air. Back at the diner, Lila stood, pulling her apron off. She grabbed her bag and looked at Preston. "There's something I need to show you." He followed her silently as she led him to a dusty garage behind a hardware store a few blocks away. She unlocked the door, and inside, in the middle of the concrete floor, was an upright piano. A little scratched, the keys yellowed at the edges, but it was hers. The last thing she'd brought with her when she left New York. She sat down, lifted the cover, and let her fingers hover just above the keys. "I've played it only twice since I left," she said. "Once when I arrived. And once yesterday." "Play it now," Preston said softly. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I need to know what you're capable of when you're not scared." She hesitated, then placed her fingers gently on the ivory. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. Then she began to play. It started quiet, gentle, like a whisper. But then it grew, note by note, until the air itself seemed to change. Her hands moved with fierce grace, like she was peeling back time, speaking through the keys in a way no words could match. Preston stood still, not even blinking. This wasn't just music. This was power. Raw, beautiful, impossible to ignore. When she finished, silence filled the space like a sacred pause. Preston finally spoke. "He can't bury this. Not again. If you show up to that hearing, not just as Lila Hart the runaway, but as Lila Hart the pianist, he loses." Lila looked down at her hands. "You think it's that simple?" "No," Preston said. "But I think it's worth fighting for." She stood up, her expression unreadable. "Then I guess I better decide who I want to be when I walk into that courtroom." That night, back at her apartment, Lila barely slept. She kept staring at the envelope, the letter, the words that tied her to a world she tried to forget. She pulled out an old photo from a shoebox, her and Julian as kids. She looked at his face, smiling at the camera, back when things were simpler. Before music. Before envy. Before it all fell apart. And as she placed it back, something inside her hardened. This wasn't just about money or reputation. This was about reclaiming who she was before the world told her what she had to be. The next morning, as sunlight cut through the clouds, Lila stepped out of her building, wearing a simple black coat. Preston was waiting by the curb. He didn't say a word. Just opened the door. She got in. Because it was time. Time to stop hiding. Time to face the man who wanted to erase her. Time to remind the world exactly who Lila Hart was. Preston drove in silence, eyes fixed on the road, but his mind turning fast. Lila sat beside him, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze out the window. The city passed by in gray streaks, a blur of noise and motion. Neither of them spoke, but both could feel it, something was shifting. There was no turning back now. They arrived at the courthouse just before noon. Lila stepped out slowly, shoulders tense, her coat wrapped tight against the wind. Preston walked beside her, silent support, until they reached the glass doors. Inside, security guards checked bags and IDs. Lila's name triggered a quiet nod and a polite usher toward the elevators. Preston tried to follow, but a guard raised a hand. "She needs to go in alone," he said firmly. Lila turned to Preston and gave him the faintest nod. "I've got this." He watched her disappear behind the elevator doors, then stepped back, uneasy. Something didn't feel right. Upstairs, in a high-ceilinged courtroom bathed in pale afternoon light, Julian Hart stood tall beside his lawyer. He wore a navy suit, crisp and sharp, with an expression carved out of stone. When Lila entered, every head turned. For a moment, the room went still. Julian's mouth twitched in a smug half-smile, but Lila didn't flinch. She walked past him without a glance and sat at the respondent's table, back straight, jaw set. The judge entered, and proceedings began. It was formal, sterile, details about estate distribution, terms of the will, language in old documents. Julian's lawyer spoke with precision, painting Lila as absent, unreachable, and voluntarily disconnected from her responsibilities as co-beneficiary. Lila's court-appointed advocate objected when needed, but it was clear this was an uphill climb. Then Julian stood. He spoke calmly, respectfully, with an air of false concern. "This isn't about money," he said. "It's about honoring our mother's legacy. My sister abandoned her, abandoned us, and now she wants to step back in as if nothing happened. I loved my mother every day of her life. I stayed. I cared for her. I watched her health fail while my sister played piano in Europe." Lila inhaled, jaw tightening, but said nothing. "And yet," Julian continued, "she shows up now, only because she has no choice. That should tell you everything you need to know." The judge turned to Lila. "A mess. Hart, do you wish to respond?" Lila stood, eyes locked on Julian. "Yes." Before she could speak, the courtroom door creaked open. A bailiff entered, walked briskly to the judge, and whispered something. The judge's eyes flicked up, then back down. "We have a complication," the judge said. "A second party has just filed an emergency motion related to this case. They claim to be a third beneficiary." Lila froze. Julian's face went pale. A new lawyer entered, followed by a young woman in her 20s. She looked familiar, but Lila couldn't place her. Not at first. Then she saw the eyes. Soft brown. Her mother's eyes. The judge looked at the paperwork. The claimant's name is Nora Hart. She alleges she is the biological daughter of the late Margaret Hart. Born during an unreported pregnancy while Ms. Hart was living abroad. DNA tests submitted in sealed documents confirm a 99.9% match. I'll allow testimony. The room burst into whispers. Julian's lawyer objected, citing timing, but the judge overruled. Lila sat in stunned silence as Nora stepped forward and began to speak. Her voice was soft but sure. "I didn't know Margaret Hart was my mother until 3 years ago. I was adopted. My parents told me the truth when I turned 18. I found old letters, pictures, and a necklace she wore that matched one in her performance photos. It took years, but I finally tracked everything down. I never came forward because I didn't want anything from her. But when I learned about this trial, I had to. Because I'm part of this family, whether anyone likes it or not." Julian looked like he'd been slapped. He whispered furiously to his attorney, who frantically flipped through paperwork. Lila's head spun. A sister? A hidden child? Their mother had never spoken a word of this. It didn't seem possible. And yet, looking at Nora, it was. The judge called for a short recess to review the new claim. Lila stepped out into the hallway, dazed. Preston was waiting just outside the doors, already on his feet. "What happened?" he asked. "I'm not the only heir," she said, eyes wide. "We have a sister." Back in the courtroom, Julian was unraveling. He paced behind his chair, muttering under his breath, veins showing in his neck. His entire strategy, his calm, his performance, it was falling apart. Now he had not one sister to battle in court, but two. And he had no idea how much this girl knew. Or what her motivations were. Downstairs, as the recess dragged on, Lila and Nora finally spoke alone. They sat in the quiet hallway, a vending machine humming nearby. "I'm not here for the money," Nora said quickly. "I know how this must look. But I just wanted to know who I came from. I wanted to understand why she gave me away." Lila stared at her, voice soft. "She never told us about you. Ever. But I believe you. I see her in you." Nora gave a weak smile. "I heard you play once. Years ago. My adoptive mom took me to a concert when I was little. I didn't know it then, but I was watching my sister." Lila's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly and stood. "Come with me." They returned to the courtroom together, just as the judge reconvened. The tension in the room was suffocating. Julian sat stiffly, glaring at both of them. Preston slipped into the back row, watching everything closely. The judge reviewed the new documents, then addressed the room. "Given the additional heir and the legal complexities that have now arisen, this hearing will be extended. Full proceedings will begin next week. All parties are required to be present. Until then, no assets will be moved. No decisions will be finalized." As the courtroom emptied, Julian brushed past Lila on his way out. "This isn't over," he hissed under his breath. "I will tear both of you apart." Lila didn't flinch. "Then I guess we'll see you in court." She turned back to Nora, who stood there wide-eyed, overwhelmed. Preston met them by the door, nodding. "Whatever this is," he said to Lila, "you're not alone anymore." Lila looked between Preston and her new sister. The storm had grown bigger than she ever imagined. What started as a battle for her past was now a fight for her family's future. And the stage was no longer just a courtroom, it was the world watching, waiting to see if she would rise again. The courtroom buzzed with tension as people filed in for the final hearing. News had spread: Margaret Hart's hidden daughter, the disputed estate, the return of Lila Hart. Cameras hovered outside. Reporters waited by the steps, hoping for a glimpse or a soundbite. Inside, the air was thick. Preston sat in the second row, Nora beside him, gripping the armrest. Lila walked in slowly, dressed in a plain black dress, her posture straight but calm. Julian was already there, surrounded by papers and lawyers, his expression unreadable. The judge entered and called the room to order. After weeks of filings, testimony, and delays, it was time for each party to make their final case. Julian's lawyer stood first. His words were polished, deliberate, accusing Lila of negligence, abandonment, and strategic reappearance. He questioned Nora's legitimacy and suggested she was being used to muddy the case. Then he ended with a quiet, smug declaration: "This estate belongs to the person who never left." All eyes turned to Lila. She stood slowly, approached the front of the courtroom, and took a deep breath. "I left because staying would have destroyed me," she said plainly. "Not because I didn't care about my mother, but because the world we lived in, Julian's world, wasn't about family. It was about control." She looked at the judge, then at Julian. "For years, my worth was measured in performances and applause. But music is only beautiful when it's free. And I wasn't free. I was a product. When I walked away, I lost everything: fame, money, even my name. But I found peace. And now, I'm not here to fight for wealth. I'm here because I deserve the dignity of being seen. So does Nora. Our mother might have made mistakes, but she gave all of us something. And none of us should have to erase ourselves to earn it." The courtroom was still. No one moved. Even Julian sat frozen. Then the judge leaned forward. "I understand this estate isn't just about money. It's about legacy. Mess. Hart, there's been public interest in your musical background. Would you be willing to perform as part of your testimony? Not as entertainment, but as evidence. You've spoken about freedom through music. Perhaps it would help us all understand what that means." There was a long pause. Then Lila nodded. Preston stood and opened a small case in the back of the courtroom. He'd brought it just in case, a portable keyboard, professional grade, connected to a small speaker. With the judge's approval, it was placed in front of Lila. She sat, stared at the keys, and closed her eyes. Then she played. Not a showy piece. Not a classic. But something original. Gentle and raw. The kind of melody that spoke without words. Each note told a story of escape, of pain, of healing. Of family broken and stitched together again. And as she played, tears slid silently down Nora's cheeks. Even the judge looked away for a moment, blinking more than once. When she finished, no one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quiet, still, sacred. Julian stood, visibly shaken. "Your Honor, with respect, this is emotional manipulation." "No," the judge interrupted. "This is truth." By the end of the hearing, the judge made his ruling. The estate would be split equally between all three children, Lila, Julian, and Nora. But more importantly, the judge ordered the family trust to be converted into a music scholarship fund in Margaret Hart's name, overseen by a board including one member chosen by each sibling. Her legacy, the judge said, should not be a cause of division, but a source of purpose. Julian didn't speak to Lila afterward. He walked out, head high, but something hollow in his step. Preston squeezed Lila's hand. Nora hugged her tightly, and Lila, for the first time in years, let herself be held. The story made headlines that night. Famed pianist Lila Hart reclaims legacy in stunning courtroom performance. Videos of her playing spread across social media. She didn't read the comments, but Preston did. Thousands of people were moved, not by her fame, but by her courage. A week later, Lila returned to the diner, not as an employee but as a guest. Shay had put up a sign on the wall, "She played from her heart," and reminded us what it means to be free. But just as Lila thought the storm had passed, a letter arrived. Not from Julian. Not from the court. From a music agent in Los Angeles. He'd seen the courtroom clip. And in the envelope was a check, a sizable one, and a request. "We want to produce a full concert. Not for fame. For healing. One night only." The story of Lila Hart, in her own music. Lila stared at the paper. Preston waited for her answer. She smiled. "We'll see," she said. Then she picked up her coffee, glanced at the old piano in the corner of the diner, and added, "But if I do it, I'm doing it my way. Because after everything. After the humiliation, the courtroom battle, the hidden sister, the stolen years, she had finally found her voice again. And this time, no one would silence it." A month passed, and the city slowly shifted from cold winds to the first touches of spring. Lila Hart's story had spread far beyond the courtroom and the diner. Newspapers called it the return of a forgotten virtuoso, while music bloggers wrote long pieces about her emotional performance and the legal drama that surrounded it. But for Lila, the attention didn't matter. What mattered was something quieter, something deeply personal. She had found her rhythm again. Not just at the piano, but in life. The scholarship fund had already received its first round of donations, including a generous amount from an anonymous donor. Lila had her suspicions about who it was, but she said nothing. She simply accepted it as a sign that healing, even for someone like Julian, might not be impossible. Nora, now more confident and at ease, had started volunteering at a local community music center. She told Lila she wanted to help kids who never had the chance to discover their talent. Meanwhile, Lila went back to teaching piano lessons at a modest studio across town. No cameras, no big crowds, just her and the keys, and sometimes a nervous child with wide eyes and shaky hands. She'd smile and say, "Let the music come to you. You don't have to fight it." Preston stayed close by, helping manage inquiries, phone calls, and the occasional reporter still looking for a quote. But more than that, he was just there, reliable, calm, always knowing when Lila needed space and when she needed company. Their connection had deepened in ways neither of them had spoken aloud, but both of them felt it, wordless and real. The concert invitation from Los Angeles had remained on the table. Lila had taken her time to consider it. She wasn't chasing fame anymore, but she knew how powerful music could be when it told a real story. Eventually, she agreed to a one-night performance, not in a grand stadium, but in a historic theater known more for its warmth than its size. The audience would be limited, the proceeds going entirely to the new scholarship fund. As the date approached, the nerves returned, not the stage fright she used to feel, but something more meaningful. She wasn't performing to impress. She was playing for something bigger. For the mother she missed. For the sister she found. For the waitress who once played for empty tips and rude customers. For herself. The night of the concert came quietly. The dressing room was dim, the hallway beyond buzzing softly with footsteps and hushed voices. Lila sat alone at the edge of a small couch, hands resting in her lap, remembering how it all began. A diner. A piano in the corner. A man who thought she had no right to play. Now, she was here because she did play. Because she didn't give up. The curtain rose, and a single spotlight lit the stage. She stepped into it slowly, dressed simply in black, and took her seat at the grand piano. No announcer, no fanfare, just her and the music. She played a mixture of original pieces and old classics, weaving together emotion, history, and redemption. With each note, she told her story without saying a word. Halfway through the performance, Lila paused. Then she turned to the audience and spoke. Some of you may know what brought me here. A courtroom. A challenge. A past I tried to leave behind. But what I found along the way was something I never expected. I found a sister. I found people who believed in me. I found the courage to face what hurt and play through it. She looked out into the dim rows, eyes landing on Nora, sitting beside Preston, both smiling through tears. I play tonight not because someone told me to, she said softly, but because I finally choose to. She turned back to the piano and played her final piece, one she had written just days ago. It had no name. Just emotion. And when the last note faded, the silence that followed was louder than applause. A breath held by everyone present. Then came the standing ovation. Backstage, as people began to leave, Lila stepped into the wings and leaned against the wall, heart still full. Nora ran up and hugged her tight, whispering, "You did it." Preston followed, his smile quiet but proud. "You're free now," he said. Lila looked at him, then nodded. "I think I always was. I just didn't know it yet." In the weeks that followed, life returned to a slower pace. Julian never reached out again. He faded into the background, choosing privacy over continued attention. But Lila hoped, in some small way, that the story had touched him too. Back at the diner one afternoon, Shay pulled Lila aside. "You know," she said, handing her a mug of coffee, "when you first sat at that old piano, I thought, she's either broken or brilliant. Turns out, you were both." Lila laughed softly. "Probably still am." They shared a quiet smile. That evening, as the sky turned gold and shadows stretched across the sidewalk, Lila sat by her apartment window, the piano close behind her. She didn't feel like playing just yet. For now, the silence was enough. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but full of everything she'd been through. Her story had started with a cruel joke, a rich man's attempt to embarrass a quiet waitress. But in the end, she didn't just play piano. She reclaimed her voice. She found her family. And she reminded the world that true talent doesn't ask for permission. It rises, quietly, from the places no one dares to look. And when it speaks, even the loudest skeptics go silent. Because the music always tells the truth.